So, one of the most common questions that I get is if Franklin Richards is so incredibly powerful, then why won't Franklin fix Ben Grimm and turn him back into a normal person? Well, there's the short answer and the long answer. The short answer is that Ben doesn't want to be a normal person, at least on a subconscious level. The long answer, in terms of how you get to that answer, is really cool. So, this is the childhood end story from the Fantastic Four. We originally covered this like a decade ago, but thought it'd be cool to remaster. And this initially picks up with Susan Storm returning to the Baxter Building after doing an interview with a woman named Barbara Walters, who's basically a stand-in for Barbara Walters, those of you guys who are old enough to remember her character. But when Susan gets back here, the Fantastic Four have been crushed. Reed Richards' hand is just like stretched around the corner, right? He's just clearly been completely dominated, and Susan doesn't quite know how to handle this. Now, one of the things to specify here, in this day and age, the Fantastic Four being defeated is kind of a big deal, but there's so many incredibly powerful people out there. It's less about the shock of the Fantastic Four being defeated in 2025 and beyond, and it becomes more of a whodunit type of mystery, like who attacked the team. At this point in time, when John Byrne was writing and drawing the Fantastic Four, precious few people were powerful enough to overpower the team. So it was a big deal when this story came out, and the Fantastic Four had been completely and totally dominated. Not only that, right? Not only is Reed Richards just laying on the ground, that Ben Grimm is over in the corner, clearly having been totally knocked out. And so the question of Susan is, what in the world is going on? At that point, she ends up seeing a light emanating from a room. And when she gets in there, you get what's probably one of the most iconic scenes in the Fantastic Four's comic book history that a lot of you have undoubtedly seen, right? Just this blonde adult guy who has Johnny Storm by the neck and is just choking him out. Now, on the surface, this seems innocuous, right? It's like a guy overpowering Johnny. But keep in mind, guys, right? Johnny is one of the most powerful non-mutant characters in Marvel. Where Marvel has Omega level mutants, non-mutants are considered Omega level threats if they're equal to Omega level mutants in power. Someone like Johnny Storm is largely considered to be an Omega level threat. I don't recall whether or not it was confirmed in Marvel, but like the guy can get as hot as the sun. You know what I mean? Like, we know it's true. And so the thing about this is Johnny being so overpowered so readily by just a guy right off the bat, it's just like, what in the world is going on here? But the guy's kind of babbling on about how he's looking for an answer to a question. Right? I need to know this. You have the answers I seek. Why won't you give them to me? But Johnny doesn't know what he's talking about because Johnny doesn't even know what the question is. And so when this guy probes the mind of Johnny, ultimately he can't find the answer. And he just like unceremoniously throws Johnny's body into a wall and that's it, right? And so it's done very similar to the way that I crapped on a Johnny Storm earlier in Marvel Rivals. But again, in all reality, this guy also displays another cool element to his abilities because he sees Susan Storm while she's invisible. Now, keep in mind, Susan Storm's ability to make herself invisible is pretty basic on the surface, right? No one can see her, but her powers are so prodigious and she's so capable in what she does. No one outside of the highest and most powerful people in Marvel can see her if she does not want them to. That's how capable she is when it comes to her invisibility. Understand, guys, the Fantastic Four are slept on in terms of like how powerful the team really is. You don't really get to see them use like the full power to the very extent that it can be used in Marvel Comics. But son, when they go all out, you will not question why the Fantastic Four is considered the first family of Marvel. They can take all comers, man. They can take all comers. They are ridiculously OP. But still, right? Susan realizes this guy can see her, something that should be impossible, so she takes off running. Now, this room that Johnny was in, where he attacked him, this room was designed to withstand the full might of Johnny's Nova Blast, an attack powerful enough to potentially wipe out all life on Earth. This guy phases through the wall like it's not even there. Literally just opens the wall, walks through, and that's it. Like, I mean, it's nuts, right? And so Susan's just like, who is this guy? Like, what is going on here? And so she does like the only thing she can do, which is actually kind of funny, right? Like this guy's phasing in and out of walls. So she just like throws her coat over this guy's head and just takes off running again. And so it just like slides down over his body and essentially turns him into Jesus. He looks like buried alien, which is actually Marvel's version of the Flash, Barry Allen from DC Comics. But again, Susan Storm is just on the run, moving as fast as she can. And then she creates an invisible wall, right, to separate her from this guy. Now, here's one of the things that you don't usually see all that often. When it comes to the force fields of Susan Storm, they are incredibly capable. We know from Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four, for example, that even if only for a brief period of time, Susan Storm's force field was able to withstand the might of 3 Celestials attacking it at one time. Not only that, the durability of her constructs, essentially created by way of her force fields, was enough to blow through one of the Celestials. So this is no small thing. This guy touches the wall and immediately creates a feedback loop in Susan Storm's mind. She can't handle it and she shuts down the force field. That's what we're talking about here, man. It's one of these things where it's just like, this story is nuts because in future stories, it gives this story context, right? And so again, like Susan Storm is just firing off shots as best she can. And so that's when she ends up in the room of Franklin Richards. Now at that point, Franklin's gone, right? The room's blown apart. The robot that was designed by Reed Richards to monitor Franklin's powers, that thing's been destroyed. It is also important to note here that Susan does make reference to Franklin having mutant powers. The reason for that is because Franklin being a mutant is contextual. When it's convenient for Marvel, as far as the story goes, he's a mutant. When it's inconvenient, he gets his powers from the cosmic control rod. As it stands now, we're in the mutant era of Franklin Richards in Marvel Comics. He was a mutant, and then Xavier said that he wasn't, but then it turned out he actually was. And so he's just kind of been a mutant ever since in Marvel. That may or may not change at some future point in time. But the big question she has here, from a mom's perspective, where in the world is my son? Because I'll tell you guys right now, man, there's Susan Storm on just a regular day when she's able to hold her own. Then there's Susan, the mom, who's worried about her child. Woe betide the poor soul that pisses off that version of Susan Storm. She will make you rue the day, because then she becomes Malice and all bets are off. Because Susan is Malice, man, she's an absolute hoss. But again, this guy unleashes this massive blast and sends Susan Storm flying out of the building at the exact same moment that like Barbara Walker and those guys are basically coming down the road. Now, Susan, of course, catches herself, right? She saves herself with one of her own force fields. A lot of that's just due to quick thinking on her part. But it is pretty cool because it shows a prodigious nature, right? She says the force of the blast is subsidious. I'm starting to fall. Only one chance. If I can project a huge force field, such a large field will not be very solid. If I can just hold it together on impact, and then of course it works. So she in effect just made herself a kind of bed to land on, right? The fact that Susan Storm can not only create a force field, but then make it soft enough where it won't kill her on impact, like hitting concrete. But that's when like everybody comes running up. And that's when you get to see this guy's powers on full display yet again. Because at that point, she's telling everybody, you all have to get out of here, right? Cops, bystanders, and all. And then they suddenly freeze. They can't move. And this dude's just standing there and he's like, let them all be still. And he says, I shall have my answer now, or let the world feel my wrath. So he comes just like descending down. And the way that John Byrne writes this is amazing, right? He's like a distorted image of an avenging angel. The golden-haired stranger drifts slowly to the street. Now, here's where things get interesting, because as they're here, right, this guy is just kind of addressing everybody, right? And really more musing to himself more than anything else. Despite the fact that he's speaking out loud, he says, the one who resisted me stands with another female. Somewhere within all these gathered people, I must surely find my answer. Yet to see two women like this, side by side, something within me stirs, feelings I cannot comprehend. For the dark-haired one, I feel strange emotions, which makes sense. Right? You know, he's an older man. Soon he's gonna get hair in funny places and start thinking about girls. But in reality here, right? I mean, this is one of these things where when he looks at Susan, he feels an emotion, but he doesn't quite know what it is. And so as they kind of start going back and forth, and where he's essentially reading her thoughts and kind of answering her thoughts because she cannot physically talk, that she suddenly realizes what's going on, and she realizes This is Franklin Richards. Now, here's the thing to understand here, right? This is actually kind of coming off of 244. And this is back in an era where Marvel wrote comics in such a way to where it wasn't really done by a series of 6-issue arcs and they may or may not be connected. It was one gigantic cohesive story, almost like a soap opera. And so at the end of 244, where we saw, Galactus basically being saved, it was, the whole trial of Reed Richards thing and all that kind of stuff, that what this did is it also showed that Franklin was playing with a kind of toy, a Rubik's Cube, that was initially tossed to him by Ben Grimm. But while Franklin was playing with it, he was getting frustrated over his inability to solve it. Now, at that point in time in Marvel, Franklin did have reality warping powers, but he was kind of like Gohan from Dragon Ball, right? Where you just see like these small moments where his powers would just activate. And it's like, holy cow, this kid's gonna be ridiculously OP. But because of the fact that there hadn't been these huge moments where Franklin had presented himself as a credible threat to the Fantastic Four as a team, even the universe as a whole, by and large, Reed was just kind of content to let Franklin be and to kind of do his own thing. Now, that robot was there to monitor things, almost like a heartbeat sensor, right? That it would just sort of monitor Franklin's powers. And if there was a spike, Reed would be like, what in the world's going on, right? That sort of thing. But this is a whole different kettle of beans because during that whole moment when Franklin was playing with the Rubik's Cube, Leave It to Beaver was on. And this statement was made, Beaver, when are you going to grow up? Franklin subconsciously absorbed that and turned himself into an adult. And that's why you have him here the way that he is. And so as Susan starts to address him as Franklin, to a degree, it kind of starts coming back. But the biggest issue that he's contending with here is that his mind is essentially empty. It's devoid of experience. And so what is really going on here is that he recognizes he's an adult, but he's trying to rationalize why it is that as an adult, he has no memories. It would be like if you woke up tomorrow and you didn't remember anything about your life after you were like 6 years old. That's what Franklin's experiencing here. Now, you take the high duress nature of that situation, you slap it onto a person who has reality warping powers, and not just Franklin as a baby, but adult Franklin Richards, whose powers are essentially equal to Galactus, making him a universal constant. You can see how quickly things could have gotten very bad very, very fast. And so as the two of them are sort of talking, that Franklin's kind of like, all right, like, what do I do here? Now, of course, he recalls his mom and some of the memories of him as a little kid begin to flood back. And so in essence, he remembers everything up to the moment that he aged himself up. But again, it's all just kind of a blank after that. Now, of course, Reed and the Thing come running out here. And what ends up going on, and this is sort of the long-winded answer to the question that you guys had, is that as Franklin is talking to Reed, it's like, okay, we need to figure out a way to turn him back into a child. But at the same time, Franklin's like, before I do, there is something that I can do, specifically for Ben Grimm. And the reason why was because Reed had, really ever since their initial transformations, been trying to find ways to cure Ben. This happened a lot in the early days of the Jack Kirby run. It happened a little bit during the Stan Lee run. In this particular instance, it was actually in Fantastic Four 238 when Reed Richards tried to cure Ben, which resulted in him looking the way he does now. And so Franklin's response is, I can cure Ben Grimm, right? I can make him into a normal person again, and he could go back to the way that he's always dreamed of being before the whole cosmic radiation powers thing happened. And so what ends up going on is Franklin looks into the mind of Ben. And the way this is explained is really, really cool, right? It says, intangible fingers probe deep into the Thing's most hidden private thoughts, sifting. And though Franklin's accelerated psyche does not possess the emotional maturity to comprehend the complexity of feeling he finds there, his child's innocence nonetheless holds enough experience to recognize there is far more to this problem than might be guessed. Instinctively, he reaches out for the mind most like his own, and Reed Richards feels a cold dread close about his heart as the truth is brought terribly home. And so Franklin goes to try to use his powers on Ben, and it doesn't work. Now, he does go back to his traditional Thing form, but he's not cured and he's not turned back into a normal human. Of course, Franklin's powers are basically, reverted back to their normal state. He goes back to being a baby again and then is taken back inside. But as Ben Grimm and his girlfriend Alicia Masters are leaving, the response of Susan is, I thought Franklin said he could do anything. Why didn't he cure Ben, right? Or his power is just not on that level. And this is where you get the answer because Reed says when Franklin reached into Ben's mind, he discovered something I failed to consider in all my attempts to cure the thing. Ben has said many times he fears Alicia loves him only as the thing. And although she has denied that in both word and deed, it is a deep rooted fear. Had Franklin cured Ben, it might well have caused severe trauma. There is the tragedy. The beautiful, blind Alicia is the one spark of joy in Ben's life. Yet, so long as he loves her, his mind will reject all cures. So long as there is Alicia, he will always be the thing. Now, it's kind of a little bit of a bonus here. During Jonathan Hickman's run on the Fantastic Four, the Future Foundation, which was basically a think tank of young kids, they came up with a cure for the thing, but there's seemingly no way to cure Ben Grimm permanently. I mean, I'm sure cosmic entities could, but I'm sure eternity could just wave his hand and say, now you're back to normal. But Marvel's not really invoking that because Ben Grimm being the thing is a core part of his character arc. So the result of this is that the Future Foundation, in giving him that cure, inadvertently set it up so that Ben would live for something like 1,000 years. He would outlive everybody, but he would go on and on and on and on and on. Again, we covered that in Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four, God, almost like a decade ago at this point. Not the original one, but the remastered one, which is an update to the one that we did like a decade ago. I'll post a link to it at the end of this video for the playlist. But yeah, let me know what you guys think, man. This is the answer to your question, right? Ben Grimm subconsciously does not want to be cured because he's afraid that if he becomes normal, Alicia won't love him anymore, man. The heart's weird sometimes. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.